Hi, I'm Pete.
Hi, I'm Stacey.
And I'm Chris, and you're listening to the 4D Plus podcast. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the 4D Plus podcast. With me today, I've got Stacey Clifford and Peter Austin. So yeah, obviously you guys are part of the 4D group, and do you want to give a quick intro to your backgrounds? Stacey, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I started off in construction about 10 years ago, joined a big contractor as a site engineer, did a few years of that and got really involved in planning some really significant civils works and used that as a way to then get into the BIM kind of digital space. So that's now where I am.
Cool. And Peter?
Yeah, I started quite a long time ago, probably like 25 years ago, but started as like a trainee foreman. So at like 16, then moved into site supervision, so more of a ganger type role on sort of large scale civil engineering jobs around London and South East. Had a little spell away from the industry for a bit, and then came back and started a degree and got into planning, sort of using my previous site knowledge, but couldn't work on site anymore. And then from there kind of got involved in some of the heavy civil stuff in London, complex projects, and there were BIM and models and that started being introduced. And drifted into a BIM role, got quite senior in that sort of role within the business I was at, and kind of had a bit of a rethink on life from various reasons, and went back into planning, but have a bit more of a digital spin on a planning role now, so kind of bring together all those experiences.
Okay, great. So obviously all of us with a planning bias. Obviously my background is sort of site engineering and project planning as well. But today, I guess we're going to talk about planning, and more specifically visual planning. Obviously that relates to 4D. And I think we're maybe just going to touch on a few things like why do we need visual planning? Why do we do it? How can we improve it? And then who should actually be doing it? Because obviously there's the perception a lot of the time that it's maybe the planner who produces the plan, but we're sort of advocating that it should be more than just someone producing a schedule, a bit bigger than that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? So maybe why do we need it, or why do we do it?
I think coming from a construction delivery point of view, it's how we engage a whole site team in the planning process. And, how often has there been a planner who's done a Gantt chart, probably spent a really long time on it, which is then, published as a 60-page PDF that no one then reads. And how do we get different people who are on that site team involved and understanding what they're going to do? Is a Gantt chart of logic linked stuck on the wall the best way of making sure that everybody who's involved in that project knows what they're actually going to deliver? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you look at what we do in tenders and have done for years. And when I first started in planning, I went into tenders 9 odd years ago, nearly 10. And first thing I was doing was just taking PDFs that we had, creating models from the PDFs so that we could understand what the project looked like. Because I think one job we only actually got like 4 PDFs and some pictures. And they went, "We'll have one of these, please." So, again, we created those models ourselves using simple tools. And then understood it, we could communicate that to people and linked it to the program. And then again, over the last, even 10 years ago, people were doing it. We create these lovely tender presentations, don't we, to explain what we're planning to build at tender, but then we don't necessarily follow that on through into the actual construction and revise it when we get the revised design. So yeah, it's engaging people right the way through the project, not just at the beginning.
And some of that as well is looking at, what people think 4D is. I think quite a few people think that there's this massive barrier of entry, and actually probably what site teams have been dabbling with that doesn't really get caught up under the 4D banner is, using the tools available to people, whether that's how often are we still doing time slices by drawing over a general arrangement in PowerPoint? And, certainly when I was a graduate, it was drawing the same thing over and over again to show, the project at different points in times. And we've got to get on for not, doing the same work over and over again. There's got to be more sensible ways of creating that kind of content on site using relatively low-tech solutions before we go all the way to, the vision where everyone's engaged with, maybe fully rendered 3D, 4D, dynamically linked models. It's what can we do as project teams in that middle space to get into getting that engagement with people and the understanding.
Yeah. So on the basic level, it's about communication. Then that's probably more than half the job, in actual fact.
Exactly, and that is primary. A planner's prime part of a planner's role, and it is taking all the inputs, seeing what the contractual requirements are, what information there is, what the design information is, putting that together in a logic link program, and then communicating that back to people and getting the feedback of how it works. And again, it could be the full, as you said, Stacey, there, the full 4D models, etc., with animation if it's required. It could be time chainage diagrams for more linear projects, because we've tried 4D over the years and on those jobs, and it doesn't work on mass. Could just be Excel, but dynamically linked to the program. Just allowing the automatic colouring of boxes rather than people manually colouring them in. There's a whole raft of ways you can do it, and using effectively free tools as well.
Yeah. So who do you see doing all of this mostly on sites at the moment? Do you think it should just be planner, or does it actually need to be, the whole team should be doing this on some level?
I think that, we see health and safety as a responsibility of everyone on site and quality now. And I'd like to see somewhere that we get that actually everybody on site, coming down to your last planner kind of concept, is that everyone on that project has some understanding and some input into what that plan looks like. And the more people that understand it, the more opportunities they have to feed back and say, actually, have you thought about how this might work or how this might not work?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as you say, and that's about, how do we communicate with them? If we just go and give them a massive PDF of a logic link program that they don't have visibility of the logic, then they're not going to be able to. I mean, some simple things we've been doing, because again, if you look at the responsibilities now of who does what, is, planner pulls together information, manages a program in a logic link system, whatever that might be. They'd have to communicate that to the site team. The site team then break that down into more detailed activities and what they're planning to go and do on site, or should do. And then that's communicated out to the works managers and the foreman for them to go and do a slightly more detailed thing of, you're going to go and do this, you're going to go and do this. So there's this whole level of and stream of information, but it comes from the high level program, the contractual program, doesn't it? So it's everyone has a part to play, and within that you'll have people creating, as you said earlier, their own manual time slides. So what we've been doing is looking at how we automate that flow of information from the master program, the contract program, right the way down to this is what the person's doing on site, and then recording their progress to feed back into the updating of the program. Again, trying to get everyone involved and getting that loop. And part of that loop doesn't involve anything visual, as in sort of model 3D based visual, but it's presenting it to them in the way that they need to look at it. I mean, we've been doing some things around kind of giving people tools that are like PowerPoint, where they can create their own shapes on an overlay, but then giving them codes so we can then link them to activities in the program by codes.
It's having a range of tools as well,
important,
isn't it? Like, you don't have you don't send the same kind of communication to your client that you do to your works managers, and it shouldn't be any really different with the project program. Like a 4D model that's been done either by a dedicated resource or being sent out to a consultant might be something that your client wants to see, or might be appropriate, during the tender phase. But are you going to do that on a week by week basis to brief out to the site teams, or you'll have your high level program, but then you'll have your 6-week look aheads that are usually done by engineers, section engineers, sub agent level. are we going to expect them to be doing 4D sequencing, 4D modelling, or are we going to give them some more accessible tools that kind of fit somewhere in that halfway house that's actually more appropriate level of input and time, but still gives them something better than, again, a Gantt chart?
Yeah, this is it. It's because obviously, there's so many varying types of people on site, and the skill sets obviously vary between age groups and what have you, and actually what people want to do, and maybe that's more of the case of people actually wanting to do it. Because I've been on sites where you get some engineers who are really into planning their stuff using, say, SketchUp or something like that. They're quite happy to jump on SketchUp and plan it out, whereas others who are just more happy using a 2D drawing and marking out with highlighters or something.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that, and maybe the way people just naturally fall to what they're happy doing or happy using?
Well, as I say, this is where we've started, looking and developing tools. I mean, fortunately, we have people who can do some development, which is always helpful. But about creating a tool where they can effectively use it like PowerPoint, so they don't have to learn how to use something new effectively, because it's what they've always done: take a screenshot, mark it up. And again, in Excel, we've been using things like the look ahead programs. So it's the same template as they used to use, and then all we've done is added some bells and whistles in the background, so it starts linking things together. But for them, they're using the same interface they were using previously to try and make it friendly. I mean, we got into the view of, should we turn this into an application and a web app, and then you detract from the fact that, as you said, the people who have a lesser level of IT skills or a lesser inclination to use technology, you're kind of excluding them out, aren't you? So yeah, I think it's just the right tool for the right job, but also bearing in mind the end users of it, because we can get far too technical. And as I say, I think that's where sometimes some of the more complex, 4D tools and that fail a little bit, because they're really good. They have loads of really good functionality, but only, 0.5% of the people in the industry could probably work out how to use it. You use a slightly lesser tool, you get a lesser outcome, but you're getting, I don't know, I'm just guessing numbers here, 5-10% of people might be able to use it. And then you go down to something like an Excel thing with loads of formulas that they can just literally put some numbers in boxes and it sorts itself out. You're then,
as long as they don't break.
Exactly. Yeah. So but then you're engaging, far greater number of people into that process. So it's the right tool for the right job, but also based on the end users that are going to be, actually inputting the information.
Yeah, because we like to say, people can visualize a 3D model just for design review, say, easier than 2Ds. But how often do we put 3D models in front of project teams or give them free access to it? And actually, most people don't actually take the opportunity to use it unless they're in a workshop environment where someone's driving it for them. So kind of doing the same with 4D is actually, people will probably, unless they're happy with the 3D space, to then even start going into a traditional 4D space, is how do we mimic what people are more naturally inclined to do for the most part?
Yeah. And
it does fall back a bit to behaviours and what people are comfortable with doing or what they're just familiar with doing.
Yeah, and I'd personally rather like to see a process where more people are engaged with a lower technology skill set, but more voices in the room, than something that probably visually looks wonderful, but has been done by, the one person sat in a room completely disengaged from the rest of the project team.
That's a very interesting point, and that's really valid, I think, because I think sometimes we get hung up on those who are, I guess, quite good at tech, in inverted commas. We're quite happy to sit there and do something and then try and communicate that to people. But we also have to bear in mind that probably the vast majority of people on site have absolutely zero interest in creating something like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you go back to your point there, Stacey, about the 2D drawing, and someone would like to just sit there and mark up a 2D drawing, But again, if you gave them a very basic level of skills and the right tool, you can almost say, well, instead of colouring in those blocks and you have to look at 5 different drawings to get all the elevations of it, because you can't see, let's say it's columns. You've got one elevation where you see those columns, and then you turn it. If say it was a square, you'd have to get 4 elevations, and then probably on plan you might get some more and that sort of thing to try and work it out. Whereas if you give them the basic skills in a model environment, for example, and just say, well, if you select the piles that you want to be this grouping and you just give them a code, and then over here in this spreadsheet, you just type in, some information against this code, and then, hey presto, we can link those things together. Again, so you're kind of tricking them into, they've created a 4D, and I think we were doing some of this a few years ago, Stacey, when we were looking at jobs, again, just trying to make it easy for people to just do their own little part of the information. But again, because people were using the same sort of codes and references, they were creating the sort of the 4D as a byproduct, or the visual side of it as a byproduct. The same with time chainage, same with a lot of these things. You can kind of use data and information and people's comfort of technology to kind of feed into it, rather than, as you said, the one person in the corner and it becomes really technical.
Well, one of the things that we did do on a previous job is we actually kind of struggled with that a high-level program connection to the 4D sequence, because it was such a big program, and actually found that if we got to the section engineer sub-agent level and the 6-week look ahead, what was really useful is to get them in a room, with the CAD tech, with their planner if they had one, if not, if it was what they were doing themselves, and actually work out what do you want to see in order to be able to visualize what you're going to build. So, and then what we would do is we would go do that modeling work and show and do the initial coordination, but then let them run that simulation. And we had a tool where we would say, pour slab, but that slab might be made up of 10 chunks. Actually, all they needed to do then is the 10 would come in line with their program dates, but they could click on them in turn and go, well, actually, that one's going to go first, and then that one's going to go first, and then that one over there. Yeah. So actually, they were already involved in the creation of the initial sequence without having to do any tech stuff, and then they could put the detail on it based on clicking on which order things would go in.
That's great. I think that goes back to what you guys were saying earlier. I think, Peter, you were saying about rolling it down, as in from the contract program down to the, through the 6-week 3 look aheads, like you're saying there, Stacey, and then making sure that you can relate it back up to that contract program.
Exactly.
That's really key, isn't it?
Yeah,
but then they have the power to plan underneath how they're going to do it within that duration,
giving them the constraints of the contractual programs. How often do we see one contractual program go to a client, and then the team delivering that works are doing something that's completely, unaligned to where that's going, and then we wonder why progress report and things going back up is a struggle, because we've got two versions of the truth before we start.
Very well, it's a version of the truth, and then just something completely which was never meant to be the truth at all.
Exactly.
And I guess that goes back to the reason why we're trying to push visual planning, 4D, whatever you want to call it, is to make sure that people understand what they've got to do rather than just a bar on a Gantt chart, and then also for them to feed back so that everyone's confident that we're on the same page.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's one of the things, big takeaways from being in the whole BIM world and standards and standardized coding and structure. And again, I used to think like that in a planning world anyway, which is what kind of got me excited and into the BIM world. And the main thing I went into it was to try and improve, I think same with you, Stacey, as well, wasn't it? To try and improve planning and the way we built jobs. Of course, we then ended up getting into what the standards stay and rolling out common data environments and naming conventions. So you get on the flip side, but the good thing with that is you get a real insight into structured data and how the hierarchy of structured information can happen. And you look at it in modern planning software, most of them, everything, you have a unique ID for the program, and every activity within it has to have a unique ID. So you've already got your starting point, and then again, it's just sub-referencing the parts that make up that ID. So again, this is how you start getting your connection back in it, and that allows you to then roll down and up. So yeah, you haven't got, an Excel or a PDF of an Excel in a 6-week look ahead that was created by this person over here, and then a pictorial version in PowerPoint that somebody else created manually here, and a time chainage version that somebody else has created over here. You can drive all those things from that information because you've got the connection. And again, you can even roll it back the other way. You can say, take the start of this activity ID and the end of this activity ID, and just using simple, lookups and things, you can then extract the dates, so you can summarize it up as opposed to drill it down. So again, it's just getting that connection of information and using simple tools to visualize it. Again, whether that's an Excel Gantt chart that's summarized or more detailed, whichever. Coloring in squares. I mean, I did some stuff years ago on linear jobs with cladding panels in tunnels and glazing panels on a roof. So you start with a simple spreadsheet that someone puts a date in when they're going to install the first panel, and then it just proratas all the durations all the way along and colours them all in.
It's interesting talking about squares, because this is where I started getting into this. Is, so often we have to wait for the inverted commas BIM model to be ready, or we don't tend to I don't think I've been on a project yet where we've actually finished the design before we've started planning how you build. The two things tend to run concurrently. So if we're always waiting for this 3D model to arrive from the designer that's all, 1192, 19650 compliant, you just never get started with any of these tools. And I think if we always head for 4D, being so dependent on this whole process going before it, we never get started and we never do anything. So it's, sometimes you might not have a CAD tech. Okay, so what do you have? Can you make squares in Excel, light up different colours that represents, chainage down a motorway? If you do have kind of 4D software, but you don't necessarily have the 3D input, can you model cubes that are basically really, low level of detail that actually just represent a space or a discipline? Like, what can we do? I mean, people used to be dabblers in this kind of thing. You would knock up something that looked about right in SketchUp, maybe, if you had it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it seems to now be more like, oh no, you've got to have this entire process, done before we could even start looking at 4D. And actually by the time you've done that, you've probably lost your opportunity of, it's the same with any of this. Like, the earlier you can visually rehearse and do things and mess up on a computer, the less likely you are and the less costly it is to do it when you're out on site and you've got gangs and equipment sat waiting.
Yeah, that's a good one of those things. There's a couple of things that you're talking about there. And I think one of them is timing, and obviously the level of information, and the other one being the level of information that you get. Because like you say, nothing's ever 100%, not in anything. No. I mean, even at the end of the job, the program's not 100%. No. There's still stuff going on. But timing's one of the big things. Like Stacey, you were talking about, say, that example with the slab, say, and you pass it down to the team and they might want to split it up. That, how far in advance is that done? Obviously, it's got to be reasonably well advanced to actually get the value out of it and confirm it can be done in that timescale.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the issues there are around, how disjointed is the planning operation from the design management operation, because often in the, when someone's specifying, hopefully someone is specifying what goes into a 3D model, do they even know how that's actually going to be broken down yet? A lot of the time that's done on, RFI back to the designer, a few weeks before before the concrete gets poured as to, can we put our construction joints in these areas? By which time people are going to go, oh, we're not going to get the designer to redesign it to show you these spaces. There's, and then so you get stuck in, well, the 3D's not right, so there's no point in doing the 4D. And you go back to, okay, well, what do we do then?
Yeah, I mean, it becomes slightly more difficult on, I say, civil infrastructure jobs, mainly because things aren't modular. They can't be modular. You have in situ concrete, which always throws the massive discussion. So obviously you run them on the slab. Take a parapet. A parapet could be in situ or it could be precast. So, these are decisions that aren't always made in the tender. So if you get a tender model, you just get a long parapet that goes, I don't know, half a mile along a bridge, and it's a couple of meters high, so many, 300 thick or whatever. But again, at that point, everyone will say, well, we don't know whether it's precast or in situ, so we don't know roughly how big it's going to be. Well, you go, well, you could make an assumption and say, I don't know, let's say it's 2.5 meter panels, because if it was precast, you could lift them quite sensibly with a crane, and if it wasn't, you'd need an expansion joint here and there. So, but again, because you don't get that, and that comes out of the constructability conversations, doesn't it? About, is it over a railway? Yes, okay. Can we do this? Can we put crash zones in? Can it be in situ? Can it be precast? But again, it's those conversations. There's a little bit of chicken and egg, but you'd like to think at the beginning, when a job was being thought about initially, that some of those decisions could be made, and if they don't know, they could just make assumptions. Or other option, obviously, is using tools, so 3D design tools that allow things to be split. So obviously, and this is the right tool for the job scenario again, isn't it? But from a design perspective, how many times have we seen the elements of a job or a design being done in one particular piece of software because it allows you to put lots of data parameters in to please some asset data spreadsheets or whatever, but it doesn't allow you to manipulate and cut up the design in situ items, because that would be the sensible thing from a constructability. So it's you've really got to get into those conversations and what is the intention of the model from all purposes. And we used to do a lot of things early doors, again, looking and trying to scope out, what are we trying to achieve from BIM, digital, whatever you want to call it, on this job. And you do have to scope that stuff out, because that can quite fundamentally change the way the model's built, what tools you use, what process is delivered. And as you say, Stacey, then it becomes a blocker to doing anything because someone didn't follow the process. So now we're, completely.
So now we're not going to bother at all. And
exactly.
actually,
there's everything, we won't do anything.
Yeah, these tiny little steps, and I think for most situations, just starting to do something would be better than, we've worked quite closely with software houses and, trying to get people to adopt all sorts of digital engineering, digital construction techniques. And it's the same. It's not just 4D in the planning world, but people will stick to what they know until something is perfect. And we're never going to get perfect. We're never going to get, by the time perfect has been developed, there'll be a new perfect, and they'll have that for a reason to not start or to start changing over anyway. And I think we've got to, make people feel safe that they can actually just get on with something. Just, there's things out there that are available that are probably, if we're using Excel, probably you already have it on your computer. And a whole range of software tools from, relatively cheap through to relatively expensive, level of skills required to use them, a whole range of stuff. But you don't need to completely go for the platinum standard to think that there's any value in starting the journey.
No, exactly.
So do you think that generally the communication of the planning process has just been poor on sites? Say between, it goes from bid, and then that gets passed to the construction team, and then they don't look at that because it's not communicated to them properly. So they just go, all right, we'll just work it out for ourselves.
What's the amount of times
do you think
hear
that's where we need to improve mainly? And that's why we're not getting such engagement from the site teams on planning as we perhaps should.
Yeah, I think so. Again, it's this whole, how many times you hear the tender program didn't work, so we're going to rip it up and start again. It's like, well, fundamentally that's what you priced the job on. So you have to start with that,
Yeah.
regardless whether it was right or wrong. But that's what your price was based on. So then you need to amend it to then amend your price. So it's that whole. But yeah, how it's communicated and the level of information you're given with it. So people blame the tender planner, for example. I mean, I've done a bit of tender planning, and you always get blamed when we win a job, and sometimes people get nervous when you win a job because they know it might not have been right.
Yeah,
All that
yeah.
sort of.
What have I missed?
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, we shouldn't have ever won that. Oh dear, we've done it wrong. But the point being is, if you and people do lots of really good work in a short space of time to produce a tender program, and there's no way they can capture everything. But the key thing, obviously, is the assumptions that the program is based on. And again, it's this communication piece to the site team of, this is why we said this is why this is this duration. But at the moment, that kind of work, because it's not really linked to the program in my general experience, and it's not there and visible, and you can't visualize it.
Gets
and
put on a digital shelf.
Exactly.
Your virtual filing cabinet in the corner.
Exactly. So you go back and you go, oh, they've completely made a hash of the lift plan. We need to redo the lift plan, which can fundamentally, and it's like, well, if that was communicated in a far better way, and again, if it was a fully linked model, 4D model, that would be really good, because that would show you exactly what their thought process was. But if it wasn't, it could just be a more dynamic lift plan, that sort of thing. But again, because the information gets diluted, and it's exactly the same with BIM and all the stuff that's done in the design, and it's the same thing. We lose information. Someone else redoes it. When they redo it, they don't think of things that were captured in the first place. They may change the risk profile of the job because they didn't quite understand it.
Yes, yeah.
And I think there is a bit of a fear, and I think you may have said it on one of the. I know you've said one part of this on a previous podcast there, Chris, but it's your program said this. Okay, this isn't my program. This is our program. I just helped put it together. So there's that side of it. But then there's also other side where certain planners get very precious of it, and they don't want to share it with people until it's done. And again, my view is nothing's perfect. It's the blank piece of paper, isn't it? If you ask people what they want, they give you nothing. If you give them something, they'll make comments. So the quicker you can give them something in a method they can understand, even if it's not right, the point is people will then come back with what is right, and then you can feed it back in. And that's an iterative process.
And that's how you get more and more robust with what you're going to
build. More people with their eyes on it in ways they can understand it. Again, it's this one person, this magical planner in the corner who's really good, cannot do any it doesn't matter how good you are and how much experience you've got, you cannot do a program on your own, because you are not going to go and build it. That's fundamental.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you have to go, all these 50 people, 100 people, however many years of knowledge they've all got, and go, look, this is what I've done. Have a look at it. Yeah. Tell me why it doesn't work. I don't want
What's it they used to say about planning a program? It was only correct until the ink was dried.
Yeah.
But you might take that a step further and say, well, it was only correct until the ink was dried, as long as people had some input to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Because otherwise, it's based on one person's thought.
Exactly, which is why NEC is a massive step for planning and really good, because it's a point in time, isn't it? You have a data date and you bring all the information that at that point in time, change, progress, you put it all in there together and you say, right, this is what we think as a team at this point. You submit that over, and then you move on with life, and you get on, and then 4 weeks later or a month later you do the same again, and you know what you know, and then you pick up change and you look backwards again, away from the JCT Moore contract program, and then you've got a separate program. And NEC kind of drives this behavior, but
it's also driving that behavior within the team, not just between your team and your subcontractors or your client, because I've worked with planners before that have taken the desk that's furthest in the corner, or they found themselves a little room and they've closed the door and they've gone, I'm doing the contract, and that's kind of it. And then they wonder why things don't match up. And actually, you could be brilliant in P6, you could be a brilliant planner, but if we see it as a standalone operation that doesn't engage people, then it's kind of going to fall down for me, I think.
Well, this is the debate about, bringing it back to the, visual planning in general. It is half the job or more than half the job is the communication. actually putting it in the Gantt chart or whatever is just something that you can do because you know how to use a bit of software.
Exactly.
You're a facilitator of that, really.
Yeah.
If you can't communicate it to people, then, well, that's the biggest issue.
Exactly. Again, it should be, and when I was on site as a planner, years ago before I came out and went into the BIM world, I used to go out on site a couple of times a day, walking around, taking pictures, talking to people, and just engaging with the team and going up to the machine drivers and what do you think? How do you think the outputs are running? I'd add all the information and the progress, but again, it was just to get a feel and go, do you think this is realistic? Do you think this is likely? How do you think it's going to happen? But then also used to go in the office and do the detailed calculations of this is the size on heavy logistical jobs. This is the size of the bucket.
Yeah.
This is the bulk, in fact, of the material. This is the size of the wagon. How many loads an hour can we get in theory, given the logistic? So I used to do all that technical calcs and put that in a program, but then, go and verify it with the people actually doing it.
It's interesting what you were saying, Chris, about like this facilitation role, because I think some of the things that we've talked about in this kind of visual planning is giving project teams, site teams tools that they can do some of it themselves, and they're empowered to do some of it themselves in their own little world. But actually, as you get further and further up the chain, is it the planner who is also facilitating, or is this the role of your 4D person, maybe, or your BIM person, or whatever we call these people that are on site, probably with many hats on? Do we have someone who facilitates that conversation between different parts of the site team and different disciplines to enable people to understand the program more, or is that the planner's role? Because if they're coming to it and they're also facilitating it, is it something that they're too involved with to work out what that conversation is, because they always know where they kind of want to go?
Yeah, they could steer it, into their thoughts.
Yeah. Well, there needs to be some steering, I think. And, ideally on the best projects, you've got, it really ought to be the project manager.
Mm-hmm.
The project manager's the guy, director, whatever you call him, is the person that's going to drive it, and things come from the top. So behaviours start from the top and they filter down. So if you get those people interested, obviously if they're not interested, then nothing happens, really.
Yeah, I was just going to mention a little bit on the again, the importance of feeding this back into the processes in the business as well, isn't it? Because it's lovely us all talking about it, and we've fallen down with this over the years on various things. Where I say fallen down, we've done loads of good work on developing tools, developing processes, making them work. But unless the business absorbs them back into the processes, so does it go into the planning processes, the project management process, so that we will use these tools to develop the program, and we will communicate it in this kind of methodology, not the absolute. But again, that's quite a key thing, because if it's not, so we have something current business called a planning manual that defines the planning process. Doesn't give the nth degree, but it gives a load of tools and processes people should follow. So we're currently looking at all these things we've been talking about today, basically, and writing them back into that, and therefore they can be mandated and implemented because they're on our quality management systems.
Which says as well that you've got the ownership and the buy-in of the business, because
Exactly.
Anything where you're trying to change how people work, at whatever level of technology you're trying to implement, if people haven't seen it before, and sometimes, the first time you try some of this, it might not go as well as you expect, and there's a learning curve there. Yeah. But if people go on the next job go, oh, it was really hard over there, so we're not going to bother, you've completely wasted all the learning that you did from trying it and not quite getting what you thought in the first place. And you've got to have that, either someone's got to drive, no, well, it's going to be better this time because we learnt all this stuff, and gets iteratively better, or your business has to say, you're doing it because we see the value in it, and get on with it. But you'd kind of hope that there'd be the bit more like ownership from people who see a benefit in their role, and that kind of everyone kind of just develops in this kind of area without some having to have the big stick of thou shalt do it.
I think you were saying it that earlier, Stacey, on a obviously on the site level about empowerment. And obviously the biggest win you can get is when the guy, whoever's doing it, actually thinks they've come up with the idea themselves, or has come up with the idea themselves. You're trying
exactly.
you're trying to steer
Yes.
them down a path, but the only way that people really get on board with it is if they're actually doing it themselves. They feel like they've created it.
Yeah.
Totally. And my joy of setting this little 4D sequence up a few years ago and thinking, oh, haven't heard from the sub-agent for a while, like bet he's not updated this, and found that he'd been updating himself, cutting an MP4 and submitting it to his manager every week. He totally, after 3 weeks of kind of helping in a weekly update, he'd got it, he saw the benefit, and was doing it off his own back.
That's great.
And such a win for me to trying to get people to adopt this stuff when I don't actually have to be part of the process to do it.
Yeah. No, exactly. You hand it over. Yeah, you help develop the process and then go, there you go, this is what we're doing, continue.
And that's
again,
the site teams
let them know you won.
owning that process, getting benefit from it, and coming to you when they're like, could we do this slightly differently? Have we got different tools that we could use? Because it's theirs.
So, and then I guess that's, going back to what you were saying, Peter, about, and Stacey as well, actually, about trying to get a wider process. You write something down that is kind of, I guess, narrow-ish, but then how do you get people to actually feed back and get creative in that process as if they've created it themselves? So is that just being able to have the flexibility to use a wider range of tools?
Yeah, so we had this discussion the other day internally. I'll sort of talk around it, but yeah, we were. It's around the whole look ahead planning, scenario, and there's certain people in the engineering teams, again a small number, that can use some of the more basic level logic link planning tools, and obviously that helps them develop as planners for the future as engineers, and it helps them understand logic. But then you've probably got, I don't know, let's say let's go with the 80-20. Let's say 20% of them can use that sort of technology and understand the logical links. You've got the rest of them who would do that process in an Excel thing traditionally. So again, it's now, how do we marry that up? So the process will say, we take the information from planning tool from the database, we put it into Excel, people fill it in Excel, and then we push it across into our progress management tool. Now, if they wanted to have, on a specific job, they wanted to use a piece of planning software to do what they're going to go into the Excel, that's the bit we need to go. That's fine. So the flexibility to do that, but we're not going to write that into the business process because not everyone can do it. But we can, have that as a supplement that this job is doing above and beyond, because they're also doing their own detailed planning in planning software. So same with supply chain, isn't it? If you get some supply chain members can use planning software, some can't. So you'd rather get a program that told you what they were doing than one in a particular bit of software that was absolute garbage because they couldn't use it. So yeah, again, you've got to have the high level process that defines what needs doing, how information gets from A to B to C, and then you need to feed in the sort of edge cases and the above and beyond that people can do. But as a minimum, you must follow this process.
It's also recognising those people who have gone above and beyond, and whether that's just being self-motivated, whether that's they've got a particular skill set that not everyone has, and making other people aware of it. And that, again, giving people, the pat on the head and the recognition that they've actually made a difference. I think as an industry, we are terrible at sharing case studies. Go on the 4D forum and submit your case studies there, blog.
Please do,
a little shout out there. But, we have to think that everything's perfect before we tell anybody else about it. And actually, if you do one small thing better and 100 projects do that one small thing better, you've probably made a bigger change than one project going all out on something that you might not have all the stars align to recreate on every project. So if you can do one thing but actually, broadcasting that one thing has changed, is different, and has made a difference, then you get more people kind of wanting to try it than, seeing this huge change that looks all big and scary.
Very good. Okay. So I think we're at a point now where we can wrap this up. I'll just do a quick recap. So we've tried to distill it down into 3 things. So why do we need visual planning? And I think we've talked about obviously communicating the plan all the way down from bid stage through to on-site, and then from different levels down to site level or whatever, and then back up through to confirm understanding. And I think we've talked about process, so getting processes in place, but that allow some flexibility for people to work within them, but still give the information that we need. So in terms of getting the right information back into the contract program, for example, making sure that what people are doing is relevant to that. Because as you said before, Pete, obviously that's what the job's priced on. So initially we need to respect that at the start and at that point of the information. And then who should be doing it? Yeah, so we've talked about facilitators or planners as facilitators, and being able to communicate properly through those channels. And then Stacey, I think, saying about empowering the site team to work within the program, and getting them to own it and feel like they've created this, so that they're really driving it themselves, and you're just helping to oversee it and making sure it stays in check. So I guess if we were talking about takeaways, do you want to, Pete, do you want to go first and say what you think one of the most important things people should be doing for visual planning?
Yeah, I think that you just said it there, is just do something. Nothing's right. There isn't one particular method.
5 times.
Yeah. I think you just said it again then. But again, it is look at the information you've got, look at the tools you've got, and do something with them. Again, if that is automatically link some activities from the program in Excel to some boxes that color themselves in rather than doing it manually, then do that. If that's create some simple 3D objects using a piece of 4D software and linking them to the program, do that. If you do have a really good detailed design, use that. If you've got, plant equipment in a 3D environment to fully understand logistics, use it. If you haven't, just use what you have and create information as you need it. Again, start simply and then build upon it. Okay. And just do something.
Just do something.
Get the information out there. Get people looking at the information in a way they can understand it, and get comments back.
Stacey, I think Pete's probably stolen your
He's probably stolen. It's almost like we've worked together for the last 5-6 years, eh? But yeah, at the end of the day, it's people that plan projects and it's people that deliver projects. So get those people the tools, get them in the room together, and get them talking about what they're planning on building, and hopefully you'll see a more robust project program come out the back end of it.
Messages: don't let the 80 hold up the 20, or even less.
Yeah.
Was it you said, Stacey? Doesn't have to be perfect.
It doesn't have to be perfect. If you're waiting for it to be perfect, you'll have built it on the back of a fag packet. Yeah.
We'll probably have to get the a little bell out for next time. Actually, if we do something like this, for the amount of times that we've said it doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah, that can be the new strap line. That can be the new title for this one. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect.
I prefer JFDI, but anyway.
JFDI. Oh. Just fucking do it.
Yeah.
Yep.